I'd like to invite up Representative Frank Chopp and Jessica Spear to have a small debate for the 43rd District Representative. And also, as a reminder, on the back of the agenda, you can write questions down. So actually, we wouldn't mind doing that for the remainder of the evening. It will help the process go a little more smoothly. So if you have any burning questions, please write those down and hand them in. And when we go over to the question portion of the debate, I will read from those. Sound fair? All right. So the way this is going to work is each candidate will have a 2-minute for an introductory statement, and then open to questions, which I will take from the audience, with the option to pose a question to his or her opponent. And then they'll each have a 1-minute concluding statement. All right. So would you like to go first?
Sure.
All right.
So good evening, everybody. My name is Jess Spear. I'm a member of Socialist Alternative. I'm a climate scientist, and I was the organizing director for 15 now. I'm running for State House because Speaker Chopp and the rest of the state legislature do not represent the needs of ordinary working people. Instead, they loyally serve the interests of the major corporations that dominate our state economy, like Boeing, Microsoft, and Amazon. And while Boeing gets the largest tax handout in United States history, we face the fastest rising rents in the country, criminal underfunding of education, the highest poverty rate in 50 years, and continual cuts to our public transit. When Boeing told the legislature, give us more tax breaks or we're going to leave the state, the legislature held a special session, and in just 3 days, they came up with $9 billion to subsidize Boeing's already massive profits. Less than a year later, Boeing has shipped out over 6,000 jobs. When teachers and parents go to the legislature and tell them public schools are underfunded, we need to lower class sizes, we need to give teachers a cost of living raise, and get that backed up by a state Supreme Court order, the legislature tells us after 4 years that we have to keep on waiting. And it's easier to pass a tax handout than it is to fully fund education. I'm campaigning to end this type of corporate welfare, to tax the super wealthy to fully fund education, public transit, and clean energy jobs, and for rent control and affordable housing to deal with this housing crisis that we're facing. You know, Frank Chopp is going to talk about this or that piece of progressive legislation that he's passed, but we need to take a step back. We need to look at the forest and not get distracted by this or that tree. Let's actually see the social crisis that is happening under his leadership. He's been in office for 20 years. He's been the state Speaker of the House for 16 years. And what we have is more favors for big business while working people struggle under the worst economic recovery since the Great Depression. The choice in this election is very clear. We can have 2 more years of corporate servitude, or we can have a voice for the rest of us.
My name is Frank. We have a handout going around here. It's a brochure highlighting 12 of my accomplishments over the last few years, including many of my endorsements. I also have a list of the labor organizations representing working families across the state. There's hundreds of thousands of members of labor unions who supported me because I've been in partnership with them, passing a very positive, progressive agenda for organized labor. Then there's another one that's a short summary answering Jess's question about what have I done for working people. Including starting the first home care worker union in the state and doing a whole lot of other things to help working people throughout the state of Washington. And then lastly is a summary of about 25 things the House passed, a very progressive agenda that passed, that got killed basically in the Senate the Republican-dominated Senate. So let me give you 3 issues in particular to highlight. First of all is health care. To me, it is absolutely a fundamental human right. It's a fundamental human need, it ought to be a fundamental human right. I led the effort for the last several years to greatly and massively expand health care for all. 800,000 kids on Health for All Kids. I started that program. Virtually now, half the kids in the state are covered through single-payer health care provided by the state for free. 800,000 kids because of my efforts. And a lot of other folks because we work in coalition to get the job done. About 500,000 people, adults, got added through the Medicaid expansion, which is something I've been fighting for many years and defended programs like Disability Lifeline, Basic Health Plan, and others to carry it out through this 500,000 expansion of adult Medicaid. In addition, if any of you have had root canals, you know what I'm talking about. We have passed an expansion of free dental care to 600,000 people in this state over this last 2 years. Those are tangible accomplishments affecting real people's lives. Next issue is funding for education. A year ago, I passed a $1.3 billion revenue package. There was about $500 million of closing tax loopholes. There's another $500 million of additional taxes on businesses, primarily services, professional services, and also reinstating the estate tax on wealthy estates to make the tax system fairer. That was a very positive and very progressive agenda, which passed the House, died in the Senate. They went along with about $300 million. Our plan, which we passed, would have fully funded the first phase of McCleary to carry out not only what we believe should be done in terms of greater funding for schools, but also to meet the court mandate, which we worked with to make sure we met that. The last issue I want to mention, and probably my time is up for this part of it, is affordable housing. To me, I've been working on this issue for many, many years. I have a very strong record on that. Let me give you a few examples. I was one of the co-founders of the Seattle Tenants Union. I co-founded the Low Income Housing Institute and many other low-income housing organizations. I helped start in fact, I was one of the 2 co-founders of the State Housing Trust Fund. Over the last several years, I've added $1 billion of state money into the Housing Trust Fund. Now, what does that do? It builds affordable housing all across the state, like farm worker housing for those who pick our crops, but also even in this district alone, I've funded through the Housing Trust Fund, in coalition with others using a lot of local nonprofits, we funded about 75 affordable housing units, rent-controlled affordable housing buildings. So 74 apartment buildings in this state have rent control because of my efforts to the Housing Trust Fund. That's just another example of the tangible things that I've fought for and got done to benefit the people of this district and this entire state of Washington.
Thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and go on to the question portion. And this question is to both candidates. The question reads, the U.S. is one of few countries that do not offer paid maternity leave. What do you propose to fix this?
Yeah, it's a shame that we live in such a wealthy country. In fact, this country is the wealthiest in the history of civilization, and we don't have paid sick maternity or paternity leave. And I think that this, again, just opens up the question of revenue and how we have funding for social services that are absolutely necessary, how we have the support necessary for people to take care of their newborn children. And I would say that we need to look at the elephant in the room, and that is the massive tax handouts to big corporations that don't need them. Boeing doesn't need $9 billion. They made $35 billion over the past 10 years and paid nothing in taxes in any state that they've operated in. They don't need any more money. We also need to tax the super wealthy that live in the state. There are 68,000 millionaires that live in King County alone. We should be taxing them so that we can fully fund our social services. Instead of raising property taxes on working people and retired people that are living on fixed incomes, we should be taxing the super wealthy. And unfortunately, we have the most progressive tax system in the entire country. And after 20 years, we don't see any movement to really do something about that. It's great that we have an estate tax. That's great, but that doesn't help if you blow a hole in the state treasury by giving Boeing $9 billion and then you don't have the money to fund education.
I strongly support paid maternity and paternity leave. This is something that this country ought to do across the board, but we ought to start here in Washington State and in this city of Seattle. As part of that, we've worked in concert with a lot of folks, including UFCW 21, who's endorsed me, who worked with me to develop the plan at the state level to pass paid sick leave. We passed in the House, it died in the Republican Senate. It's another example of progressive legislation that we passed in the House, died in the Senate. We need to change the state legislature, but we've got to change the state Senate in terms of this, because that is what's holding back a lot of these things. We worked together with one of the organizations that I started was the Economic Opportunity Institute. They were the authors of the paid sick leave that passed City of Seattle, a year or two ago. And so I worked very closely with them to make sure we come up with a progressive base and figure out tangible ways we can actually accomplish that so we get the job done.
Thank you. And unfortunately, in the interest of time, we're going to have to, would everyone be okay with me asking one more question?
I think that's why they're here.
No more. I don't want to learn more about buses. All right, here's another question from the audience. I recently So when will the legislature do its job and develop a state progressive income tax proposal?
I started the Economic Opportunity Institute that I mentioned before. One of the goals of that was actually to propose to the voters of this state a progressive income tax. It was on the ballot in 2010. That was not the best year, as you pointed out, to run that initiative. But we did it, we put it forward. It was a very progressive tax on the wealthy in order to fund basic education and programs like that. We put it forward, didn't get through the voters this time, but we need to look at ways to make the tax system more fair across the board, either by legislative action or by a vote of the people across the state. We've got to work together to move the state forward.
We need to campaign and call it exactly what it is, a tax on the wealthy, not an income tax. That's why 1098 failed in 2010. And I think that we have to look at the people that were running that campaign, Speaker Chopp and the Democratic Party establishment, for the failure of that campaign. It was polling in the high 60s when it first came out, and people understood it to be a tax on the super wealthy, not a tax on ordinary working people, but they got worried. They got worried that the Democrats would get this power to tax your income, and what do they always do? They pass regressive tax after regressive tax, and people were worried about a slippery slope and possibly seeing their income tax in addition to the regressive taxes they already face. High sales taxes, entertainment taxes, bag taxes. I mean, the list is just endless. And I just want to point out that he can say that it's a Republican-dominated Senate, but it's not. 2 Democrats turned over to the Republican side. What does that say about the Democratic Party itself? And the other thing I'll say is that in 2007 to 2010, we had supermajorities of the Democratic Party and the Democratic governorship. And what did they do? They cut $10 billion from social services. There wasn't this massive progressive agenda that was passed. So should we give them another chance and hope that something different is going to happen? I would say no. We need people that are going to boldly campaign for what we need. If you want an income tax, if you want progressive taxation, then you need somebody that's going to go out there with the organizing experience and who will boldly say, we're going to tax the super wealthy, we're going to tax the corporations. And the reason they're not doing that is because those people are who are funding their campaigns.
Allow each of you to ask each other a question?
Sure.
Okay.
No.
The ending statements will be right after this. I'll allow you to ask each other a question, and then we'll move on to concluding statements. So Mr. Ask Mr. Chopp questions.
Yes, so the announcement that Boeing is going to ship another 2,000 jobs, and now this totals over 6,000, I think is causing everybody to question, when is the legislature going to hold a special session to rescind Boeing's tax handout and use that revenue to fully fund education?
We are proposing with the Machinists Union and many other unions a tax accountability effort, a new legislation to bring accountability to those efforts. We passed it before and actually improved the accountability of these tax breaks or whatever. But we think we need to work together to carry that out. If you talk about actual numbers, the net gain of manufacturing jobs over the last 10 years has been over 30,000 net new jobs, manufacturing jobs in this state. I work closely with the Machinists Union, the State Employees Union, the State Labor Council, and many others on those issues to make sure that we produce more jobs that are here in this state. And that netted out far more money for the general fund of the state than if Boeing had left. So I think you need to look at the big picture and work with us to move forward this accountability measure.
Would you like to ask a question? All right.
Nope.
Your turn to ask a question.
I did? That was my question.
Would you like to ask her a question?
No, that's okay.
Okay. We'll go ahead and we're going to, just in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and have you do your concluding remarks. We'll each have a minute. So since you started this here, Mr. Chopp, please do your concluding remarks.
Well, let me get back to the housing issue. This is extremely important for this city and this state. I'm working right now on 3 different locations for affordable housing in this city, totaling about 500 units of housing. The way we get these things done is we mold together the community and also nonprofit groups and also other government funding, etc., to actually get these things acquired and built. 500 more units, rent-controlled units, is on the block right now at 3 different locations. And so I'm asking you to work with us. We have a group, for example, on housing affordability. Got about 25 stakeholders and advocates on affordable housing working with me right now, and we're carrying that out. One example, for example, now that Brady's here, is we're working hard to get Sound Transit to make the air rights available for affordable housing. In that case, 100 units of senior housing, rent-controlled, affordable housing. Those are tangible things right above the Broadway station of Sound Transit. because we need to not only have more affordable housing, but if at all possible, it ought to be connected to transit. There's many examples like that, including other sites throughout the city. So if you'd like to be involved in these things, like the affordable housing efforts, we have specific projects. If you want to be involved in our mental health agenda, I've got a 30-person task force for that. You can also funding for higher education. I've got another 25 people working on that to come up with a progressive revenue source that's dedicated to higher education, to build on our efforts to make sure we help our students get a better shape in life. Thank you very much.
It's a shame we didn't have an opportunity to really discuss affordable housing, but I'm just going to throw something out there for us to take a step back and look at the situation. We have the 8th worst affordable housing in the entire country. So you can point to this or that thing, but let's take a step back and see the real situation. I want to thank the Eastlake Community Council for inviting us and having the opportunity to have people here to ask questions. And in closing, I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning. It's clear that Speaker Chopp and the rest of the state legislature, they prioritize granting the wishes of a major corporation like Boeing over fully funding our social services, our basic needs, the needs of ordinary working people who they're supposed to be representing. This or that piece of legislation over a 20-year career does not make up for the fact that we have the most regressive taxes in the entire country. We have an education system that is criminally underfunded. The state Supreme Court said he was in contempt of court for failing to fund education. And our transit system is continually facing cuts, even though we need to be increasing public transit to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. You have a choice in this election. There are so many races that are going unchallenged, but you have a choice in this election. I encourage you to join with us to end corporate welfare so that we can organize and implement the policies to help workers and small businesses thrive, like rent control and more affordable housing, and actually moving towards a progressive tax policy. Let's finally put our needs first by removing this 20-year big business servant.